Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 219, Winter Hydration Strategies for Real Life. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Real World Nutrition Podcast. Today's episode focuses on something that most people forget about in winter, and that's hydration. And it's easy to get through a cold day and suddenly realize that you've drank almost nothing. You're indoors more, you're cold, you're busy, and water doesn't tend to be top of mind this time of year. But obviously, and of course, your body still needs it. And dehydration can sneak up on you faster than you might realize. Now, you may not have a problem with this. Your hydration might be right on target. I know a lot of people do have it, they have it on point. But trust me, there are plenty of people who do tend to forget about it this time of year or don't realize that it is still important. So with that, I want to mention first that this episode pairs with a blog I wrote earlier this week, that was released earlier this week, I should say, on holiday hydration. So it's not just the holidays, but winter. And I have that linked in the show notes as I always do. But I also know that not everyone's going to go read the blog, not remember, and you're listening to this on the go. So you might forget, and this provides plenty of the information you need, although the blog does have some different information. But my goal here is simple. I want to make hydration realistic, practical during what is often a chaotic time of year. Now, a lot of people have chaos throughout the year. They're busy, stressed throughout the year, but it tends to be magnified this time of year with the holidays. So first, I want to start about what is winter hydration or dehydration, I should say. Why does winter dehydration happen? And one reason that hydration tends to fall apart in winter is that the usual cues are different. Most of us are not sweating the same way we do in the summer. You don't feel that obvious thirst that comes with heat or exercise or the extra sweating. And this is, of course, assuming you live in a climate where it doesn't just get cooler in the winter, but colder. And that cold air also dulls the thirst response. So by the time you feel thirsty, you may already be behind. Indoor heating is another issue. Heating dries the air, which tends to pull moisture from your skin, your sinuses, and your lungs. And if you live in a dry climate, this is even more pronounced. All of us lose fluids simply by breathing, by respiration. Breathing in and out, we lose fluids. Most people don't think of that. They tend to think of dehydration as only sweat, but the environment that you live in plays a role. And then on top of that, winter routines tend to shift. Holiday events can mean more alcohol. It can mean more salty foods, more travel, less water throughout the day. And of course, all of those affect hydration status. Now, how dehydration shows up in the wintertime? The tricky thing here is it doesn't always show up in the obvious ways. You might not feel thirsty. Instead, you may feel tired, you may feel unfocused, irritable, or hungry even after you've eaten. Some people might notice headaches or dry skin. Some people will feel chilled more easily. And obviously, it's wintertime, so you're going to chill more easily, but this is meaning even more so than what would be environmentally related. And that tends to surprise people because hydration does affect our ability to regulate our body temperature. Dehydration also affects digestion. So constipation is very common this time of year. And while fiber is, of course, part of the story, a big part of the story, fluid also plays a huge role. And then there's muscle cramps and joint stiffness, and that can worsen when hydration is low. Athletes will feel this in their workouts or even post-workout, but even people who are simply walking more, shopping, traveling, or trying to stay active in the winter months, they might feel those muscle cramps and joint stiffness. So what about hydration and the holiday-specific habits? So I want to talk about those things that really tend to get in the way of proper hydration and adequate hydration this time of year. So I mentioned alcohol earlier. Alcohol tends to be a big one. So of course, if you don't drink alcohol, you can skip over this. I don't know how far you can skip over it, but it's just one of those things that does contribute to our hydration status, or I should say adequate hydration, because alcohol is a diuretic. So that means it causes a response in the body that increases fluid loss. So even one drink can influence our hydration, especially if your baseline fluid intake is already low. So a simple strategy is this: alternating water with alcohol, and start with the water. But it's not a miracle fix. It does reduce the impact. It does help keep hydration levels higher than if you're not having the water. But you really want to make sure you're doing that at least 1-to-1. Having more water than alcohol is best. Now, caffeine is another factor. Now, it is not nearly as dehydrating as people think. But if most of your fluid comes from coffee and you rarely drink water, you may still be following behind. So caffeine is a mild diuretic, but it also is something that if we're having coffee, the diuretic effect of the caffeine in that cup of coffee is balanced out by the water in that coffee, in most cases. But other things that you can do to help with your hydration: hot tea, herbal tea, warm water with lemon. You can do broth, even decaf coffee. These all count as fluids. It all counts. And then, as I said, holiday food tends to be saltier. Yes, we've got the sweet stuff, but we also tend to have saltier foods. And salt pulls water into the bloodstream, which means we have an increased fluid need. Now, that doesn't mean you need to avoid salty foods. It just means that water becomes even more important. So sometimes people think, well, salt causes you to retain water. Yes, but it also, drinking more water helps flush that excess salt or sodium out. So increase those fluids to help flush out the extra water retention. Hopefully that makes sense. It's counterintuitive, I know, but it's really helpful. Now, I get this question a lot. How much water do I need, or how much water is enough? And there's no single number that fits everyone. Most adults do well. Most adults do well with that general target of around 64 to 80 ounces. Athletes need more, meaning people who are highly active indoors or outdoors, they need more. People at higher altitudes often need more. People in those dry climates may need more. And keep this in mind: if you're traveling to a higher altitude or a drier climate, remember that you need more. So if you're going on a ski trip or a trip to the mountains and you don't normally live at a higher altitude and dry climate, this is going to be key. This is not uncommon. I live at a high altitude, about a mile high, and it's not uncommon for visitors to have impacts of altitude sickness, partly because they're not drinking adequate water or fluids and combining alcohol, which they think they're getting food poisoning when it really is altitude sickness. So again, if you drink alcohol, eat salty foods, your needs will go up slightly than that general 64 to 80 ounces. And just keep in mind those different environmental factors. So here, thirst is not always the best guide, especially in winter. Our body's amazing. It's got a lot of things that go so well. But sometimes this thirst mechanism falls a little bit behind. So a better approach is just having a steady intake throughout the day. If you wait until evening to catch up, you may not feel great with that high volume, and it might interrupt your sleep. So let's talk about some of those early signs of dehydration. Here are some cues to watch for. Dry mouth or dry lips, feeling tired even when you've slept, hunger that shows up even though you ate an hour ago, headaches, difficulty focusing, darker urine, constipation, feeling colder than usual. Now, these are common enough symptoms or cues that people may not connect them to hydration, but these are pretty closely connected to dehydration, mild dehydration. And one of the great things about this is it's a quick fix. Make sure you get your hydration up, and a lot of these things will go away. Now, I do want to make sure that I say this. If you're well hydrated and you're still experiencing these symptoms, don't ignore them. There could definitely be another underlying reason for them. So if you're having difficulty focusing or headaches and hydration doesn't fix that, what else is going on? Now, I also want to talk about food-based hydration. So despite what people might think, hydration is not just from liquids. Certain foods help as well. Winter produce, all produce, but the citrus, grapes, pears, apples tend to be more in season in the winter. Leafy greens, soup-based meals, so stews and soups, hearty soups, still contribute that water. And even yogurt can provide fluid. Now, these are not replacement for water, but counts towards your overall total. So there are certain amounts that our bodies need, and some people, certain amount of fluid that our bodies need, and people think that's the amount of water that we drink. No, we adjust that to include foods as well. But also, as I said, soup-based meals, broth-based soups are really helpful when the weather's cold because, it's a nice warm way, at least I think it's nice, a warm way to get fluid in pretty quickly. So in summer, we might have like a lemon-based water or all kinds of, tea, things like that. But having something like broth is totally acceptable as your fluid intake. You don't need to tell anybody what's in your water bottle, really. But also consider this. Even oatmeal contributes fluid. Even some of those dried foods that you think of, rice and pasta, and like I said, oatmeal, we have to cook it in water for it to be edible. So it contributes. So I want to talk about some of these hydration strategies for real life. Here are some simple ways to stay hydrated without feeling like you're needing to drink all day. Now, first up, start with a morning drink. It doesn't have to be cold water. There's nothing magic about having this water first thing in the morning. It's not boosting your metabolism or anything like that people think. It's just a way to get a jump start on things. So this can include warm water, tea, or even some of your morning coffee will count. As I said, maybe start with an 8-ounce glass of water or other fluid and your coffee, I should say. But again, beginning the day with fluids puts you ahead instead of catching up. Water with lemon first thing in the morning is not doing anything other than providing hydration. The other thing is keep a water bottle in sight because if it's visible, you're more likely to drink. If it disappears into a bag or the car, it's out of sight, out of mind. Now, people say, I'm going to carry around a water bottle. And I say, okay, carry it around and drink from it. So with that, I recommend drinking a little bit every couple hours or even throughout that hour. So you don't need to have giant amounts at once. Steady intake is better. So when I'm at home working at my desk, I try to ensure 8 ounces an hour, which is about 2 to 4 ounces every 15 to 30 minutes. Much easier to have those consistent sips rather than the bigger amount all at once, which tends to make me not feel good for a little bit. As I said earlier, hydrate before alcohol. Even one glass of water beforehand can make a difference. Use those warm drinks to your advantage. If cold water is unappealing in winter, don't force it. Tea, broth, as I mentioned, warm water works. I've had people who have moved my water bottle and are surprised that it's warm. I'm like, well, yeah, I do that in the winter. I warm it up because I'm more likely to drink it. May sound weird to you, may sound gross to you, but that's what works. So do what works for you. Now, this one is a tough one, in my opinion. Hydrate during travel. And the reason I say it's a tough one, because boy, airplane bathrooms, if you've been in one, you know what I'm talking about. Trying to find a rest area or a place that has an open bathroom when you're on a road trip, can be a problem. But it's still something that I encourage. So airports, or I should say, when we're in airports, when we're on road trips, we're on flights, we might have that increased risk of dehydration because of the very reason I said. If you're like me, avoiding it is sometimes easier, but then I've noticed how dehydrated I am, and it's really hard to catch up. So here's my recommendation, of course. Bring a bottle with you. Refill it when you can. And I just suggest you don't take your favorite water bottle. One, because I've left a water bottle on airplane. It wasn't my favorite, luckily. But this past fall, I saw someone accidentally drop their Yeti water bottle from the top of a ferry boat. And she said, I dropped my Yeti. So, of course, that's why I knew that. But that was like a $50 water bottle gone. So go with one that you're not going to be upset if you lose it, or, not an expensive one. But I also, in most of the airports that I've been in, there are the fountains where you can refill your water bottles. And if you forget, this happened to me this past fall. I forgot my water bottle, but I broke down, bought a bottle of water at the airport, but held on to that sucker for a while, so I was able to refill it. Include those hydrating foods. As I've said many times, those soups count, the broths counts, but also the fruits count, vegetables count. So let food do part of the work. And then here's this one. Pay attention to bathroom habits. If you're going with longer gaps between bathroom breaks, like hours, it probably means your hydration has slipped. I'm not saying you have to go to the bathroom every single hour, but when you haven't gone in a long time, or when you do go, it's really, really concentrated. So, why hydration matters way more than people think. Hydration is foundational. Water is the most essential nutrient. And it does affect our energy levels, our appetite, our digestion, our skin, our immune function. Yes, hydration affects our immune function. It also affects our joint comfort, cognition, or our ability for our brain to do its job properly, and how our body regulates temperature. And during the winter or these colder months, these areas already tend to be strained by stress, the cold air, the heavier foods, and often disrupted routines. So proper hydration helps support our body through those demands. Now, here's the thing. It's not about having it all in every single day and beating yourself up if you miss a day. This is one of those things that's an ongoing thing. We can get out of sorts. We can get thrown off our routine, get back to where you are so-called on track with getting your hydration. And you don't need to carry a giant gallon jug. You can refill the water bottle. The big key here is about consistency and also awareness. So, if hydration has slipped for you this season, you're not alone. You're not alone. And the goal is not to turn it into another task that feels like pressure. The goal is to support your body so that you feel better throughout the holiday season, into the new year, and all the time. So I want it to be low stress. Really, just have it be so it can become mindless. But it does take practice to get there. Okay, with that, again, I want to remind you that the link to the blog post that correlates with this one or is a companion to this episode is in the show notes. That one's called Holiday Hydration. And it does give more details, but also connects to the winter specific needs. And I would love to hear your feedback on this if you have any, or, hopefully it was helpful. You may have your hydration down, but it's something to have a reminder here. All right, everyone. With that, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Real World Nutrition. You have a great week ahead. Take care and bye for now.